Good day. Thank you for joining us for the Secure Connections podcast brought to you by IoTSSA, the Internet of Things Security Services Association. I am your host, Brian Sherman, and today's episode is a few simple steps to ensure effective network security. And joining me to share his insight and expertise in this area is Patrick Albert, Associate Vice President of Product Management for Auvik Networks. For those that are familiar with Auvik, it's a network-focused software company that helps MSPs improve the efficiency and profitability of their managed services operations. The organization's RMM gives providers better visibility, monitoring their clients' networks, automating many of their time-consuming tasks, and of course, documenting all that information. Auvik has received a number of industry awards for its innovation, including being named to the 2016 Channel E2E 100, which identifies the top disruptors and tech innovators in the IT channel. Patrick, welcome to the Secure Connections podcast, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
Very much a pleasure on our end. Let me start off with a warm-up question so our audience gets a chance to learn a little more about you. What's your favorite music genre, and what band do you listen to the most?
So the genre is easy. I'm definitely a rock fan. Choosing a favorite band, I've always struggled with that one a little bit. Born and raised with a lot more of the local music scene, so going out to see a lot more local performers, a lot more local shows. So that's kind of where probably my favorites lie. But if I had to choose kind of a popular one, I'd go hands down Foo Fighters. Primarily because I'd say, they obviously have a lot of songs. They fall in the rock category, but I really, really love just their music style, and I love listening to their lyrics. I think they've got a song for almost any situation, and I always love relating to that.
Certainly. Interesting. The local band scene is always a fun part too for me and many of the cities I travel to. I think you get a little bit of an experience of the locations you travel to and the people in that area. So that's excellent. So,
yeah, and I find with the internet nowadays, we're obviously seeing a lot more local bands getting larger presence. So it's always fun checking out new scenes everywhere you go.
Sure, and you can keep up with it a lot easier online too. That's awesome. So as a well-traveled channel professional, I'm sure you've seen quite a bit of North America. Now, of all the great places you've visited over the years, which city is at the top of your must-return trip list?
I think on the personal side of things, I'd have to say Chetty Camp in Nova Scotia, which is in Cape Breton. Absolutely beautiful, incredible views, amazing hiking. But more on the professional side, I could say that I've been luckily had the opportunity to go visit Anchorage, Alaska, and down to Hawaii, both for work, helping out some MSPs. So I think those are phenomenal places to go visit professionally as well.
Very cool. It sounds like you enjoy the outdoors a bit and also cooling off and warming up. I think it's good to have both.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. So thanks for sharing, Patrick. Now that we know a little more about you, let's get down to the business of talking cybersecurity and beginning with an issue that many MSPs are facing. What are some of the biggest network security issues providers should be most concerned with today?
Well, so I'd say, just to start this out, I'd say, there's been a lot of major hacks in the news lately, both on the business side and on the technical side, so all over the news. And obviously that's starting to gain a lot more attention worldwide. Now, everyone's very, very secure, very concerned with having very layered security approaches to their endpoint management. So that's, having antivirus, backup, anti-spam, etc. Ultimately to make sure that their devices are completely protected. But up until recently, the network aspect of these security practices has not been getting a lot of attention. I think we'll talk a little bit more later around some of the specific examples, but more network-related ones have definitely been kind of the spotlight of some of the business and tech news lately. So I would say, specifically to network security, I think some of the two major problems I'd say are not completely understanding your customer's network, and that kind of falls into when an MSP is onboarding a customer or prospecting a customer. They'll often go out and take a look at the network, document what's out there, what devices are where. And that's typically a fairly expensive thing to do time-wise. So it's not something that a lot of MSPs like to redo very frequently, though it is really important. I'd say most MSPs, at best, will do it quarterly, more often do it yearly. But obviously, a network changes absolutely every single day. New devices come on, new devices get removed, and especially with all the different internet-enabled devices. You have people's cell phones going on the Wi-Fi. You have new printers that are Wi-Fi enabled, and you have IoT devices that are popping up without the MSP needing to be involved. So I'd say, the first challenge is really understanding what's on the network itself. And then the second part I'd say is, with the implicit trust that we have in the devices that are actually able to get onto the network, we almost assume that, hey, if a device is on the Wi-Fi or the device is on the network, it's safe and it's fine. We're very, very, very focused when it comes to network security to outward in attacks. So preventing hackers from getting in from the outside. And I think that's getting a lot of attention. So I think I would say one of the biggest challenge around network security is really the awareness of inside the network, both the trust and what's actually physically on the network.
So it sounds like along the lines of rogue IT. I know that term's getting a lot of traction in the channel.
Absolutely.
And the line of business, even though some within the organization may understand that new apps have been downloaded and utilized for marketing or sales, it doesn't necessarily translate all the way up to the MSP.
Exactly right, and that's the thing with more technical savvy end users. The whole rogue IT absolutely comes into play, and what can you trust nowadays, right? The more that you have out there, the more vulnerabilities that can exist and that can be exploited.
So processes definitely come into play there as processes and policies within the organization.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Now, crack vulnerabilities is one thing that's topped the tech and business news recently, and I emphasize the business news because it's not just in the technology field. We're starting to hear more and more about the vulnerabilities. What can MSPs do to help their clients deal with these type of security concerns?
Yeah, so I think this ties back into my first comment around having a real-time or near real-time inventory is absolutely critical. So if the first part of patching and kind of coming up with a response to crack is what devices out there that are in your networks that are actually susceptible to this. And if you don't have a real-time view as to your inventory and what's deployed, what firmware versions are out there, that's a really cumbersome task, and also risks you missing devices. So I'd say to solve that, having real-time inventory is absolutely critical. So having the ability to easily filter out devices that are based off make, model, firmware version, so that you can identify the devices that need to be patched, and also prevent you from overlooking devices. But I think this is also, to your point, this is all over the news, which is, I think, obviously a bad thing for the how many devices are susceptible to this exploit. However, I'd say this is almost a bad example for network security because it actually has so much attention. So I'm more concerned about the other patches and the other vulnerabilities that are identified on a daily basis that don't get as much news. So MSPs aren't necessarily proactively checking Cisco's website to see what new vulnerabilities are out there, and those are the ones, because they're not in the news, are the ones that hackers and other people are going to exploit. So those are the ones that are going undetected and unpatched, etc. So those are the ones I'm much more concerned about as well. So obviously, updating the firmware on those devices is really, really important. Now, and this also relates to not just network gear. So printers are another really, really good example of this. Earlier on this year, a hacker announced that he had attacked 150,000 printers just to raise the awareness of their security issues. So he did something fairly simple, and again, just to raise awareness, he just printed out a test page saying, "Hey, your printer's been hacked." Okay, well, you know what? I appreciate that because it's bringing some more awareness. But if you think of in a paperless world, think of what's being printed right now, and what could potentially be intercepted by a hacker. So, say they've taken advantage of an exploit or even a security permission, and they're now kind of injecting themselves in the middle between the user and the printer, ultimately seeing all documents that are going through. Well, there's customer quotes, customer lists, potentially other really, really sensitive information. But realistically, what else do you actually use the printer for? When I'm thinking of myself, I'm thinking of, well, I print out mortgage applications or, my kids' school or activity enrollments. Ultimately, having a lot of really personal identifiable information that can be used for social engineering attacks or even identity theft. So these are the things that really scare me along the same lines of, I want to make sure I know what's out there and make sure that I can understand what needs to be patched and what needs to actually be, reviewed on a regular basis. And IoT just makes this problem significantly worse. Again, if the end customer is just plugging in a device, connected it onto the Wi-Fi, who knows whether that thing's up to date or what security vulnerabilities are applicable.
Certainly, the periphery, I think, is one of the scarier points for a lot of the MSPs, as well as it should be for clients and in the business community. It's not as prevalent as you talked about the printer hack. I think that's a great example, and on the good side, somebody alerting them to a problem. But from a technology perspective, how can MSPs use Auvik? How can Auvik's tools be utilized to help as far as network inventory and to prevent some of these vulnerabilities, or at least identify them and keep a better watch on them?
Yeah, and again, my first point around the vulnerability side is really truly understanding what is on your network, and I think that's something that MSPs absolutely struggle with. So Auvik's tool is designed to go in. You deploy a small little collector that sits on a device that's in the network already, whether that's a Windows device, a Linux device, or a virtual appliance, and we'll actually, on a real-time basis, discover what's on the network. And that is both reaching out and doing discovery, so using pings, SNMP, but we'll also log into the router's interfaces using command line interfaces or APIs to get a bunch more real-time information. So we can actually provide you with a real-time network map. And the network map goes into makes, models, serial numbers, firmware versions, etc. So you can quickly and at a glance see what's actually on the network, what's plugged into what at a layer one and layer 3 level, and ultimately understand what's out there and what versions of firmware are out there as well.
So you're uncovering a lot of those what could be vulnerabilities that might not show on the first pass.
Yeah, absolutely, and it is there's a lot of great stories I'd have around some MSPs implementing our tool, fairly confident that their Visio diagram for last year is very encompassing. But then they find a bunch of new devices, but then they also discover some managed switches up in the ceiling that the old MSP had used. So good examples of devices that they may have not even thought to have patched.
Excellent examples. So to kind of turn the table here too, what are some of the other things that MSPs can do to improve their security practices? We've talked about gaining control or at least a better understanding of the network, but what else can they be doing?
Well, I'd say I'd say one of the most basic things is take a look and review your configuration of these devices as well. The printer one, as I mentioned, that was actually far less about the hacker taking advantage of an exploit, but it was actually more about accessing the default ports and the default configuration on these devices. So someone plugged into printer and didn't bother to actually implement any security practices. So obviously reviewing the configuration and locking things down is really important. And then also supplementing that with vulnerability scanners like a Nessus scan, and actually doing a full deep analysis of the network from just a vulnerability perspective and kind of what ports are open and ultimately why. So the printer thing could have easily been avoided by a port scan on the network to understand, why are these ports open on the printer, and especially why are they open to the world?
So it's more of an investigative stance for MSPs as opposed to, we think of MSPs traditional, moving from a VAR into managed services space. The technology is the first thing that comes to mind, but it seems like you're hearing daily where more and more providers are building practices where they're taking a step back and doing the assessments. Do you see this as a trend for and kind of a differentiator for MSPs moving forward, Patrick?
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned Rogue IT, and I think that's a phenomenal example. because a lot of the end users at MSPs, unlike maybe 10 years ago, are a lot more tech savvy than they used to be. And that means they're going out and, supplementing your services with, whether they're plugging in new devices or new applications. And yes, you should absolutely institute some type of policy and process around, provisioning new devices or provisioning new software so that at least the MSP knows about it, so that they can, keep an eye out for exploits, keep an eye out for challenges. But again, you're never going to cover everything with rogue IT, and that's where investigative technologies absolutely need to be leveraged, so you can actually see what's out there on a reactive basis, after the fact that they've maybe deployed something that they hadn't, they've forgotten to tell you about, and that's where these types of technologies come in to be able to assess the network and understand what's the reality as opposed to what they're telling me.
Certainly. And I know compliance comes into play with that as well. I mean, some companies, as far as clients, don't have alternatives today. They have to make sure that they're have their systems tested on a periodic basis, whether it's annually. And I think you had mentioned, quarterly in some cases, which is not bad, because at least you can continue as an MSP to make improvements and point out issues that can be addressed over the long haul, as opposed to everything's got to be done right now, ASAP.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
So let's switch gears to password management. I think that's one of the recurring themes we're hearing in the channel circles recently. What practices should MSPs be instilling along that front? And is there a schedule of some sort they should be following for rotating, those crucial passwords?
Well, so ultimately, as we all know, MSPs ultimately have the keys to their customers' kingdoms, and with that comes great responsibility, right? You have all the admin passwords to pretty much every device in their network. And getting exposed can lead to an extinction event for both the end customer and the MSP itself. If passwords were to get leaked out or hacked, that could ultimately result in either one of those companies suffering very, very serious damage. Now, the traditional RMMs that are focused on endpoints make it really, really easy to change Windows passwords. But on the network side, these devices are often overlooked. Now, Auvik's tool, one of the first things we'll do when we go in to discover a network is actually try the default credentials that the manufacturer provides out of box. That sounds kind of silly, but sadly, it's kind of bittersweet. Our product will actually leverage those credentials in a lot of cases. So we'll actually be able to successfully log into a significant amount of devices when we first do our first network assessment, which suggests that a lot of people actually aren't changing the default passwords or the default credentials. So my first point is, changing it from the default, incredibly important. But ultimately, network credentials should adhere to your normal password policies that you have with your customers and their endpoints, whether that's monthly or quarterly, depending on how sensitive the situation is. They should follow a similar process to that. And that's absolutely critical to your entire password protection story.
That makes sense. Yeah, the admin credentials, the original, that doesn't surprise me. It should. The scary part is it really should that people don't. But when you hear within the CompTIA security community, they do a regular horror stories, security horror stories, and education seems to be a really bad one with passwords and USB ports being open and unprotected. So it really doesn't surprise me the more I hear about end users making it easy, and that in some cases I think that's one of the biggest challenges for MSPs is teaching the MSPs what not to be doing, but at the same part putting some protections in place to make sure when they don't do the right thing that the systems are still protected.
Yep, absolutely.
Passwords, I know, obviously, is one of those ones that are going to go back and forth with ease of use, and when you change them too quickly, it's you get a lot of resistance from some end users.
Yep.
So, no easy way to get around that. Just do it, apparently, and stick to policy. So, what other proactive steps should MSPs be taking to ensure clients are adequately protected against cybercrime? I know we talked a few.
Yeah, we certainly talked a few. And as you just mentioned, there's this constant struggle in security, and not just network related, between the inconvenience and security, or convenience rather and security. Those are kind of two different ends of the spectrum, right? So on the everyone wants everything to be as convenient as possible, but most of the time, convenience equals insecure applications, and that's always kind of a toss, always a struggle between the two different sides. So I'll talk more about that in a moment, but that's absolutely one of the bigger challenges in terms of being proactive, is ultimately deciding what's right there. But one of the other things I wanted to touch on right now is talking about configurations as well. So we talk quite a bit around some of the things that can happen, if you don't change your passwords, etc. But also taking a regular backup of your configuration, whether that is on an endpoint side, a server side, or a network side, is really, really important as well. So from a network device perspective, Auvik can go out and, using command line interfaces and APIs, actually do a backup of your network configurations automatically. Now, this can solve quite a few problems, but it also helps you be a bit more proactive. So if anything ever does go wrong, you can easily restore a last known good configuration. You can also see a bit of a timeline as to when things were changed and why. So that's another really important part. So we'll take backups very, very regularly, so you can actually see when different configurations changes were made. And I think that's another really important proactive step for MSPs to take. So they obviously have a known good configuration like you would on your servers by doing backups. Having something similar for network devices is critical as well.
Does that change management help on the compliance side as well, Patrick?
It absolutely does. So again, this is part of the struggle is some SMBs or some end customers do actually have compliances where they actually have to implement change management. A lot of them, unfortunately, don't have a requirement around change management. And that goes back down to the convenience versus security piece. Having a change management policy is often seen as an inconvenience, but it is there to protect you. And having regular backups is absolutely important for change management. So you can see who did it in some cases, and ultimately having a good restore point if anything were to go awry.
So that insight from an MSP's perspective, I think, is crucial to control. I think that's the biggest struggle I hear sometimes, is trying to understand what's going on in their client site. And with the right tools, it sounds like they will have more ability to kind of take those snapshots into different aspects of the network and what's been happening, not just today, but what's been happening in the past. So that's pretty cool.
Yep.
So what resources does Auvik have available to help its partners to improve their security game?
So generally speaking, Auvik has a ton of resources on our website. We have a blog, we have podcasts similar to this, we have newsletters, and security-related topics are covered fairly regularly. We know how important they are. We've actually just recently published an article talking about insecure protocols. A lot of devices still have some of the insecure protocols, such as Telnet, older versions of SNMP, et cetera, enabled, and that leaves you, again, increases the attack surface possible for attackers to be able to either see what passwords are being passed back and forth, or get exposure to a lot more information that they shouldn't have. That's just an example of another security resource that we posted on our blog fairly recently.
Great. So for your partners, it sounds like they have a lot of things that they can tap into to improve their security expertise, as well as their change management, password management. It covers the gambit, but a little different than we think of the traditional remote monitoring and management for managed services. So before we close, I appreciate all the insight you provided. I think there's some great points we've covered today, but any final thoughts to share with the audience?
Yeah, so I think my final thought would be around a point we've touched on a little bit, which is the struggle for versus convenience versus security. Now, customers don't want to change credentials. They don't want to have to either pay you extra or go through the pain of doing vulnerability scans. But ultimately, that's why you're here as the MSP, right? And I think one of the things I really want to stress is you can't be a trusted advisor if you're just telling them what they want to hear or the easiest answer. They're looking for the most convenience, but ultimately you need to position yourself as a trusted advisor, and that means giving them the best solution for their business, which which is ultimately balancing convenience versus security and ultimately cost as well. And showing your homework on kind of how you've come to a particular solution can help you build that trust. So they know you're not walking in and trying to oversell them on too complex of a security offering or too expensive of a security offering. That you understand their business, you understand their needs, and you're doing the right thing for their business by balancing those three elements of convenience, security, and cost. And I think, again, going back to the trusted advisor part, you absolutely need to be positioning them the right solution for that to be able to offering that. I see a lot of people trying to offer the easiest or, telling them kind of not necessarily what they want to hear, but, along those lines. And that doesn't foster a trusted advisor relationship.
How much does preparation come into play with that? You had an excellent point, Patrick, I think is showing that trusted advisor status, but it's more than just showing up. What types of things should they be doing in the background to make sure that they're becoming that advisor?
Yeah, and I think it's a solid blend of both the technical aspects and the business aspects, right? And that's offering the right solution. You can't just offer it based off a purely technology side, right? If you go up, because that would offer a fairly similar experience to almost any SMB, right? You want the most secure thing at the most expensive cost, and the least convenient because it's the best thing. But that doesn't necessarily isn't the right answer for everybody. So understanding the business side of where do they want to be in the next couple of years. Where do they see their growth? Where do they see some security risks specific to their line of business or their specific vertical or their type of business? Understanding all of these things, understanding the potential cost of a breach or a cybersecurity event to them, and kind of there's a lot of prep work that has to go into both sides, both the technical and the business, to really come together to offer the right solution for the business. Right, a doctor's office is going to need a very, very different solution than a coffee shop, as an example. Right, so offering the right level of convenience, cost, and security requires a lot of homework. And part of that are things that we touched on. So things like network mapping and understanding what's out there and doing security scans. But again, a lot of it also relies on understanding the business, where they are, where they want to be, et cetera.
Well, all excellent points, and appreciate the advice. I think especially from the business community side, that it's going to be something for MSPs to continue to hone their expertise on, is understanding their clients more and their end users more, and putting the right tools in place. But I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to understanding the customer's needs, wants, desires, compliance issues. Any other points that I left out?
No, I think you touched on all of them. Again, I think the thing I want to make sure that we stress is being a trusted advisor means providing them with the right solution, not the easiest solution. And to provide them with the right solution is a blend of all those things you just mentioned.
Well, that's excellent advice. So I would like to thank Patrick Albert from Auvik for sharing his insight today, taking time to speak with us. And on behalf of IoTSSA, I'd like to thank you for listening and encourage you to check out all the great channel cybersecurity content on the association's website. Go to IoTSSA.com. Have a phenomenal day.